Great. Right. So, good morning. I'm not even going to say good morning. That's ridiculous. I'll cut that off.
Hey, Navi. You can say, hey, Navi. Yeah.
Hey, Navi. Well, I want to introduce you. I'm going to introduce you. I met Navi Rajou in 2016 when we were on a South by Southwest panel for Frugal Innovation. And in our little chat, Navi, you might recall, I definitely recall, that we talked about mindset and we kind of found common ground because I'd been developing my Adventurous Thinking thing. It wasn't a system, it was lenses that helped you then take this other mindset. And I remember you saying to me that Americans generally are looking for a 1, 2, 3 step solution and less kind of naturally inclined towards a mindset shift. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, of course. I remember very, very well. Yes, actually the panel was all about that mindset, right? That new mindset we need in the US, actually. Yeah.
So do you think that was 2016 and we're now seeing some changes in the way US approaches things, particularly right now? We're in the middle of COVID-19 meltdown, really can't call it anything else. Huge disruption in every facet of society, particularly in the US. You're in New York on lockdown. I'm in San Francisco on lockdown. We're all sheltering and wondering what's going on. Do you glean that perhaps the American corporate mindset might be pivoting towards something a little more agile, a little more frugal?
Yes, I am an kind of eternal optimist. So I have to be, even though I am in the epicenter of the meltdown in New York, I remain optimistic. As a matter of fact, in the last few days, I see exactly that new mindset being, embraced by corporate America. It's slow. But a couple of examples that are extremely revealing, right? The way that Ford and GM, right, who used to make cars, have adapted or actually adapting their factories now to make ventilators and masks. That's a fabulous story because if you think about the car industry, I mean, symbolically, it's amazing, right? Let's take Ford, right? Henry Ford, right, invented not only the modern car, the Model T, but what's known as Taylorism, which is basically an industrial approach to making things which is focused on efficiency, right? Which is essentially standardize a product, right? You can have any car you want as long as black, right? And then mass produce it. That means you have a production system which is optimized for churning out millions of the same stuff. But the moment you ask the system to make something else than cars, the system can't adapt. It lacks agility. It lacks the versatility. But look at what they're doing, right? I mean, today, Ford has decided to make ventilators. And the way they're doing it, which is interesting, is by teaming up with other companies like GE Healthcare, who has expertise in shrinking big medical devices into smaller devices, which GE has done for 15 years in India. So they're bringing in that expertise. They're teaming up with 3M to make masks as well. So I think we'll discuss more about that, but I think the Ford example is very revealing. That's one. And the GM example is even more mind-boggling because that's really the mindset, right? Where GM says, look, we can't make these ventilators, but we know someone in California who knows how to do this. It's a company called Ventec. So they reached out to them, sent the executives, R&D, purchasing managers to California, crash course over 3 days on how to make these ventilators, fly back to Midwest, reach out to hundreds of suppliers, right, to ready all the parts because these things have to be done real time, right? And now you see they're ramping up a new production line in Indiana, all this in a matter of a couple of days.
Yeah, I think they started March 19th or something. They started March 19th.
That's right.
And they're going to start delivering in mid-April.
Mid-April.
So
which is insane.
That's insane time
Insane.
frame.
So that's really like the lean startup, kind of, you hear that in Silicon Valley, right? That's what I'm getting at. You hear that in Silicon Valley, the ability to turn around the new software product very quickly. But you and I know making a car, right? It's like 15,000 components. Making a plane, it's 1 million components, right? Very complex products that take many, many years to build and create the lines, etc., to make them at scale. But this shows that, again, that shows it's not the laws of physics, right? I mean, you can make that happen in the real world. It is here. So what changed? What changed is simple. It's a sense of urgency. And I always say that, necessity is a mother of, invention, and urgency is the grandmother, right? Because when there is an urgency, like, like this COVID, epidemic. So anyway, so I am becoming more optimistic, because when America shifts, it shifts very quickly. We have seen that again in history. So we shouldn't underestimate. The sad news is, without being politically incorrect, I guess, the political infrastructure isn't geared up to enable that. But but you know what? That's a silver lining. For the first time, if you look at the surveys, regional surveys, well, guess what? Young people now trust companies a lot more than government, because they see that companies can get things done, right?
Yeah.
So
I think what's remarkable. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think what's remarkable about the pace you just described is that we know not only is it engineers, suppliers, and people working at the front end to get this really, really moving thinking, but what it means is that at every level, they have slashed through the usual bureaucracy and the usual hierarchy. I mean, we're talking about ventilators. So that's FDA, that's life stuff with a truckload of regulation wrapped around it. And you've got companies partnering in unexpected ways, clearly agreeing in unexpectedly fast timeframes. They're getting their legals sorted in unfathomably fast timeframes, and then putting out this product. I mean, what it means is almost the collapse of your classic American legacy business hierarchy, and a super flattening out, because they must be listening to the people that are really designing in real time in order to be acting that quickly.
Yes, I think and by the way, if we criticize FDA for not being like, a behemoth, kind of a big dinosaur, but the reality is that in the last couple of years, they have taken many steps to speed up the approval of what we call life-saving drugs, or mission critical medical devices. So that's not talked about in the media, but there is a fast track. It's called, right, a fast track process for getting FDA approval very quickly. And that's being used by a lot of the companies, like in the generic drugs, in medical device sector, et cetera, who are benefiting from it. So I think we should be also cautious to not, paint the FDA as being the big, monster, which is stopping, everything. But I think what it also shows is that there's a need for partnerships here, where we all agree that, there's a shared purpose. Right? So we talked about urgency, right? Urgency can give you the initial motivation, but if there's no shared purpose, you can't sustain that motivation, right? Because the purpose here is, there's a clock ticking, right? And we'll discuss about that as well, right? So America is very rich. So there's no scarcity of money, but there's a scarcity of time. And one thing I learned in this country compared to in India, India, we lack physical resources, money. But America, I think the obsession has been time, right? We like to get things fast. Well, in a way, we criticize that, but you see, that mindset, we always look at the negative side of a mindset, right? But there's a positive in it. The ability to say, no, we can't afford to waste time, right? Get things moving quickly. Well, that's going to serve us very well now, right? Because we have a shared intent, shared motivation, shared purpose, and we have the amazing skill set and capabilities. It's just that these ingredients were there, but we needed kind of, the right timing to create a recipe just in time. And that's what's happening right now.
I mean, it's fascinating, because I've been consulting an exponential business strategy for maybe 2 years. And the key part of that is this idea that you have a massive transformational purpose, which unites people into an ecosystem. And I've always said to companies, you need to work out what that is, and then you need to put it out there and engender some trust, and then work out who your players are. And what we've seen is this transformation, I thought was coming in maybe 5 to 7 years, thrust upon us. And all these companies that were kind of the slowest movers, I think you put it really nicely in a note to me where you said elephants can dance. Yes. And this idea that, it's not just the tiny, nippy, fast Silicon Valley companies doing software, which is easy to digitize. These are people making real stuff, and they have decided to dance. I think this could be a huge transformation, because if you see companies that old and that set being able to move that quickly, then every other small business around needs to look at that and go, hold up, why am I slowing down?
And let's also be very realistic that, you know, there is no big, small. And I think that the big outcome of this crisis is that, you know, we talked about ecosystems, we talked about partnerships. So what's going to happen is that you're going to see, and this is something I've written for 25 years, which is finally becoming reality, is what I call innovation networks. So, and I'm very blunt about this, because one thing that's going to happen is that we are going to move away from these global supply chains, right? Where we used to produce in China, bring stuff to US. And so we are going to go from that old approach, which is the highly distributed supply chains, which made us so vulnerable to this crisis, to basically what I call innovation networks. So these are essentially ecosystems made up of what we call a keystone organization. A keystone organization, it's a biological term. It's an organism that actually supports the smaller organisms around it, right? Think about the whales, you know, supporting, you know, organisms in the water, elephants, you know, supporting, you know, birds, etc. in the wild. So the big companies will become the keystone of these ecosystems, like the GM, right? And then they will partner with these, you know, nimbler, you know, startups, right? It could also be NGOs, it could be social entrepreneurs. So I see actually a great degree of humility emerging among these big companies, understanding that, hey, look, you know, we don't have all the knowledge for how to make a cutting edge product, but we can team up with a, you know, nimble startup, but then we can flex our manufacturing muscles and our access to markets, our access to our distribution channels to get this product very quickly, you know, to a large number. So there's going to be, this is called symbiosis in nature, right? So there's going to be much more a symbiotic win-win relationships emerging between Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, I'm very surprised that, I may be wrong, but I don't hear many initiatives coming out from Silicon Valley right now, right?
I'm in shock.
I know. Well, that shows also, Sally, and this is something worth, you know, it's a very powerful thing we are going to discuss now, is that, you know, the problem is we touted this, you know, internet revolution, you know, Internet of Things and AI, as if we live in the world of bits. No, we live in the world of atoms. As a matter of fact, it's very symbolic, by the way, that while we were all dreading a cyber warfare caused by an electronic virus, but look what happened. It's in the real world, we got affected, right? We're getting affected by a physical virus. So that really shows that we live in the world of atoms. We eat atoms, you know, we sleep in a bed which is made up of physical stuff. So everything is physical. And I think that's what we see. It's actually the masters of atoms who know how to manipulate atoms, namely, you know, manufacturers. I see a big revival actually, right, of manufacturing.
Which I love as an inventor of stuff.
Me too. I
find this so exciting.
Except that, again, right, it's not either or. It's going to be a nice marriage of, we call it phygital, right? That's a buzzword for physical, digital. So it's going to be much more a hybrid, right? Where,
Now, how do you see this current, I'm fascinated to see how quickly the US has decentralized production. So we have this urgent shortage of N95 masks and in fact, any kind of protective covering for our health workers. We have a decentralized health system. There's no end in sight for these shortages, it would appear. And suddenly you're saying, I was part of an open source mask project and a reuse N95 project and a couple of other hacks. Suddenly you see every person I know that can sew is sewing masks to give to their local healthcare providers. The word that I hear from factories that have started up to make them is actually the workers don't want to be there. So it's going to have to go back again to the home sewers, to the Etsy's, to the people at home. But you're seeing this incredible groundswell of people who are making kind of hacked versions to then put back into the systems. How does that feed into your innovation network?
Yeah, I think that it's funny you said that, because that actually will have way bigger ramifications, which is what I call a frugal economy. It's an economy where essentially, instead of having, you know, a big supply meets big demand, which is essentially, you know, you mass produce, you know, in factory in China, like clothes or iPhones, ship them, and then they are sold in these big, you know, malls in America, right? You drive to buy big, you know, big quantity of stuff at Walmart. So the whole thing is going to collapse. We are going to have actually much more decentralized supply chains with what I call a localized supply chain. That's a technical term. That means that, everyone will say, look, I can make something in my neighborhood and give it to hospital right there, right? I may not ship it to another part of the town or the country, but I can locally produce and locally consume, right? So the idea of essentially locally producing, locally consuming is going to take off. And that actually will have incredible ramification to pick another sector where we are going to see that it's starting slowly in this country, but it's more developed in Africa and India, which is called decentralized energy. So because in India and Africa, they don't have the grid, they don't have reliable, at least electricity grid, what we have seen is what we call off-grid solutions. So these are solutions like, microgrids, we call them, right? These are small power units that generate enough power to sustain a small community. And we are going to see solutions like that already being deployed in this country. As a matter of fact, when PG&E had to shut down the grid, as you know, last year, there were a couple of Native American reservations that had rolled out prior to that a microgrid. So while the entire country was shut down, they were able to sustain their livelihoods and even save some lives in the hospitals in these reservations. So that's something that I think joins what you're saying, is that the more America has always been about decentralization. And I'm a big fan of that. I don't know why, but all my life I have been for decentralized way of creating value. And this may also have ramifications for our economy, because we talk about inequality in this country. What people actually, I think the problem is not growth, is not the fact that we have growth and there's inequality. It's the fact that not everyone is participating in the creation of economic value. And likewise, everyone is not benefiting in it. So we are neither contributing nor benefiting. But with this new model, like in the Indian American reservations, the Native Americans, well, the value is created locally and is captured locally. Right?
I think what's so interesting about that, and as a rainwater harvesting inventor, I've always been about decentralized water and decentralized energy. Yeah. And when that PG&E crisis hit Marin, we were out of power for 4 days. Me and all my friends who go to Burning Man had all our resources ready. Like we're like, oh, this is nothing, 4 days, we're good. But it was amazing how even at county level, we have vast banks of solar arrays on all the schools here, feeding back into the grid. I'm like, oh, is there not a switch that you pull down that gives us direct current so everybody can go charge their stuff and get power? And everyone looks at me and goes, oh, that'd be expensive. I find it, but what I think is interesting about the concept of decentralized energy and decentralized production, which we're seeing, is the resilience that we're talking about, personal resilience, neighborhood resilience. So with that decentralization, I think comes a greater sense of worth and an ability for, as you say, every person to feel like they're part of a solution, which, in terms of emotional resilience is really essential for humans.
And remember the panel we did at SXSW was, the title was the Maker Movement and how do we develop a sense of ownership in America, right? So that's really what we're touching at, right? The notion of ownership. I own my destiny. It's very important for Americans, right? So I think the problem is that we didn't give them the economic, tools to make that happen, right? So I think, yes, the sense of ownership, right? And the sense of belonging to my local community. I want to do the right thing for the local community and be part of this community and support it and give back to this community. Well, it wasn't possible because, when you're working for a company that makes things that are then exported, the other part of the country or the world, well, you don't really see the impact, right? Yeah. So I think you're right. I think the resilience idea is important because one thing that nature shows us is that two things. One is that nature, there's always redundancy. Things are never centralized. And so the more you have these backup systems by distributing, it makes difficult for the whole system to collapse, right? Because there's not a single point of vulnerability. So it can basically absorb shock and bounce back faster. So that's one thing. But there is another more subtle thing about resilience in the context of distributed economy is the key magic word, diversity. right?
Yes.
We know in nature that what helps resilience is diversity, because when you have diversity, well, you might say, well, that means you have, 1,000 different, perspectives, 1,000 different ways of looking at the problem. So you can come up with what we call a more robust solution, right? Than if everybody thinks the same way. So this is where I think, going back to the corporate world, what it means is that the group thinking, right? Everybody looks the same, everybody thinks the same. I think we are going to see that being maybe replaced with a much more kind of collaborative thinking, right? What we call collective intelligence, trying to bring in different perspectives. And that's good not only for creativity and innovation, but as you said, it's really for resilience. Because I think what is happening is that we don't have enough variety of perspectives in how to solve the big problems of today. But when you decentralize, right? Wow, right? You have this incredible, diversity of thinking. And according to Deloitte Consulting, they found that when organizations leverage the diversity of thinking in the teams, they reduce risk by 30%. And the quality of innovation goes up at least by 20%, not just the quantity, right?
And
but
the profit. I believe that report put the profit of those inclusive firms at something like 30% higher.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So that's right. So
thing.
McKinsey, that's right. McKinsey has also done a study in 2015 that actually shows that the companies that are most diverse indeed tend to outperform financially the other companies by at least 30 to 50%. So it has financial benefits, but also it's not just about efficiency, right? Which is about growth, but the adaptability, right? Yes. When there's a shock in the system, right? Not only these companies bounce back, I think I call it create resilience like you, which is the ability not to bounce back, which is the definition of resilience, but bounce forward. So it's almost like a kind of transformative resilience, right? So the resilience is not just about coming back to status quo, but actually, so I call it pivoting up, right? Because you're not just pivoting out by changing your products or your business model, but you're pivoting up to higher purpose.
I love it. You're absorbing the energy of the impact and using it to head to,
like in martial arts,
leap
like in
forward. I love it.
That's right.
Yes,
exactly.
So what I'd love to wrap with wisdom, because something that's resonated with me since I read one of my favorite books, but even since then, a lot of the talks you've done, not just frugal innovation, but the way that you combine compassion, consideration for scale for the planet as well as people, and that idea of collective wisdom. How do you, you're finishing a book on particularly frugal innovation in America. How do you wrap wisdom and compassion into strategy when you're helping people come up with these kind of holistic approaches?
Wisdom is essentially the application of one's intelligence to serve a larger purpose. That's the definition, right? And essentially means that, we're all smart. The problem is that according to neuroscience, what we know is that our intelligence, we always use it for selfish purpose, right? How can I get a better job, So it's always self-centered. But what we are saying is that the moment intelligence, and we see that right now, right? We have all these makers, right? Saying, how can I apply my intelligence, right? To serve others? Well, these are wise innovators. So we have a lot of smart innovators, I know, in Silicon Valley, right? Who are really thinking about making it big and become a billionaire, and like the unicorns, right? For me, unicorns are basically more the smart innovators. But we have to come up with a new term I'm struggling with right now, right? Which is the opposite of unicorn. These are companies who are saying, like, we, like the B corporations, who are saying, well, we don't want to just innovate to make more money. We want to innovate to have a positive impact on society.
Maybe it's planet. A whale unicorn combo. Maybe it's narwhal. Like you could get yes. The unicornness, but with the whale gentility.
It's a unicorn. I call it unicorn with a business mind, a social heart, and the ecological soul. Yeah, ecological soul, right? So I think nice. What you said is powerfully important, because in my book, From Smart to Wise, we don't create an opposition between intelligence and wisdom. We actually think that wisdom is about using intelligence. So you're right, you could still be a unicorn, but if you have a social heart and you have an ecological soul, that combination with the business mind is fantastic, right? So I think
that.
that's exactly what we need right now. We need wise innovators, who actually use, by the way, not their own intelligence, but know how to tap into collective intelligence, ingenuity to serve a shared purpose.
I love that. That's perfect. Thank you, Navi. Thank you. And I'm going to put links up to your webinar, which is on Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday.
It's a
Frugal
Monday morning.
Innovation.
It's on Monday. Oh, yes, the one on, there are two of them. Yes, there is one on, yes, there is on Tuesday for the small and medium businesses. Yes.
All right. So I'm going to put links on the bottom of this as well. And thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Turn